It's just a picture, Chris, Jill said with a roll of her eyes as her fingers clicked and clacked away on the computer keys. Ever since the Stars team had taken their group picture, Chris had fussed every day since then about his hair and how much better it could have come out. No, it wasn't the fact that Wesker had put Chris, Jill, and Joseph on the bottom row for goofing off and making faces while the pictures were being taken. And no, it wasn't the spine-tingling fact that Wesker insisted that sadistic bastard to stand behind them, more precisely directly behind Jill, to make sure they behaved while the photographer was finished. No, it was Chris's hair. His hair. It's bad enough that their captain was threatening the entire team with discharge without some workout that made the Navy SEALs look bad. God forbid Chris fought about his teammates' well-being over his hair. Jill continued, "Honestly, you look more worried about your look than I am." "If it's not saying over something," Joseph added, ducking behind his computer monitor to avoid an incoming paper ball. "Shut up, Frost," Chris said, already compressing another piece of paper in his palms. "You obviously don't know what good means to good look, considering that you rag always wear it on your head." Chris chucked the ball, hitting the back of Joseph's monitor. "Hey, asshole!" Joseph rolled down his paper ball. "You should talk. At least my hair doesn't look as the same dude all over it." He threw the ball, hitting Chris right on the head. Chris ducked the ball, hitting back behind Joseph's monitor. "Frost!" Jill covered her ears and scrunched her face in disgust. "God, if you're going to be act so juvenile, at least take it outside the office." "Oh, what's wrong, Jill?" Joseph taunted. "Does the man talk make you uncomfortable?" "For you're not a real man, so I wouldn't know." "Finally, someone who agrees with me," Chris chuckled along with Jill, as they gave an air high five to each other across the room. Joseph rolled his eyes and sat back down on his chair, propping his feet on his desk. "Oh sure, you two get to tag team, huh? That's what I get, Barry." He gave a nod in Barry's direction, who looked up at the mention of his name. "And Chicken, who have left yet to anything to aid my cause." Barry gave a hearty laugh and smacked Chris on the shoulder playfully. "Get a load of this guy," he replied, with a gesture of his thumb. "The hell are you talking about, Frost?" "'Cause my ass." Another laugh escaped from Barry, and a shake of his head from disbelief, and he wiped his watery eyes. "Damn, you need help." "I know, I've been kinda stressing that." Brad scoffed. "He means mentally." Joseph planted his feet on the ground and turned his chair towards Brad, who looked up from his work and immediately regretted through his tough guy attitude when Joseph's foot pressed against his computer chair. Brad's eyes widened. "Joseph, Frost." Joseph didn't want to hear what Brad plead for forgiveness as he shoved the chair with all of his might, sending Brad straight into Wesker's door with a loud bang. Everyone scrambled. Joseph rolled up to his desk and went back to his computer. Barry and Chris straightened up and pulled the random reports from their inboxes and scribbled whatever nonsense they could conjure up. Jill went back to typing, pressing her lips together and silently praying Wesker wouldn't slaughter Brad on the spot, and then go to each of them one by one. None too soon, heavy footsteps were heard on the other side of the door. Brad started to panic and began to roll himself on the desk before Vickers. Shit. Everyone, including Brad, winced at the sharpness of the captain's voice as he stepped out of his office. He approached Brad from behind and spun the chair so they were face to face. The color drained from Brad's face as his lips quivered. He looked as if he were ready to drop on his knees and beg for his life. "He's a dead man," Joseph whispered over to Jill, who flicked his ear in reply. "Ow!" Wesker's poker face was in place as he planted his hands on his hips. He gave Brad a look over before scanning the rest of his team. Expressions ranged from shocked to worried to frightened, and Wesker relished them all, but all he knew better. Brad shrank back in his seat and Wesker kneeled to his eye level, replacing his poker face with a scowl. "How about we skip the scolding cut right down to the questioning? What do you say, Vickers?" Brad swallowed a lump in his throat. I questioning, sir?" "Yes," Wesker drawled, amused by Brad's fear. "You know how often chaos breaks out in this office when I'm not around. and I'm positive, sure, in fact, that you know who the criminals are and that they may be behind my back. Is that safe to assume? Brad looked all around Wesker, desperately tried to avoid eye contact. Not that he could see his past captain shades anyhow. I don't know, sir. Wesker's poker face returned. He stood up to a full height, placing one hand on Brad's shoulder. That's not what I want to hear, Vickers. He leaned close. I know someone who put up with this. Since there isn't an ounce of courage for you to trust me, that is certain. You don't need to shred this guy's dignity to ribbons, Wesker. Chris chimed in and rose when Wesker looked over. You're insulting him as a man and an officer. I don't believe I was speaking to you. Yeah, well, you are now. Colorful language into his vocabulary, unless someone really pissed him off or messed with his hair. Wesker's chuckles filled the silent room. He peered over what excited, to contribute to his captain's growing anger. I can only smell bullshit right now. Chris sniffed the air. I wonder why. He moved closer to Wesker and stopped. Oh, that's where it's coming from. And Joseph and Brad laughed in illusion, until the matter remembered that the position he was in and clamped his hands tightly over his mouth, holding his breath for fear as Wesker turned to him. Barry, who had remained quiet throughout the whole ordeal, couldn't help but chuckle silently, slowly bringing his hand to support his chin, cautious as to refrain from provoking the angry captain that stood not at least 5 feet from him. As much as he wanted to avoid getting in the mix with these two, Barry had felt that he should put his foot down. All right, that's enough, pal, Barry said, giving Chris a pat on the back. Just sit down and relax. He gave Wesker an apologetic look. Please forgive the kid, Captain. You know how he is when he's off of the meds. You're not helping, Chris grounded out. Off meds? When was the last time he was on them? Wesker smirked widened when Jill's light giggles floated towards him. Chris frowned. I'm glad it's not that hilarious joke out of your system, Wesker. I was beginning to think you didn't have a sense of humor. Likewise. Oh, so now the spotlight's on me? Chris argued. You admitted your guilt, did you not? Wesker argued. How do you know? I'm not lying. Wesker sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose, ready to face the oncoming headache. I don't have a time for a good cop, bad cop, Chris. Therefore, until I found out the real prep, everyone will remain in the office all night if it's necessary, until I hear a confession. Joseph opened his mouth to speak. A legitimate confession, Wesker added, immediately shooting Joseph down. He checked his watch. Looks like it's lunchtime. He looked to his team and smiled. I do hope you won't mind the company of your dear captain. The only sound that follows the office was the munching and crunching and even the occasional gulping from a swig of water. Save for the numerous glances exchanged between himself and the others, Chris was already about to explode. Wesker, the nerve of him, was sitting there with his Tupperware full of nuked pasta, twirling his noodles with a plastic fork, savoring each saucy morsel, all the while watching everyone from behind his shades. It had not been for Barry beside him to calm his nerves, Chris would have knocked Wesker off his chair and forced face the pasta down his throat, since he liked it so much. Chris swallowed the last of his turkey sandwich and wiped the trail of mayonnaise that were in the corner of his mouth with his thumb. He tossed down the paper bag from his lunch and had been thrown in the trash, placing the last of its contents in its desk. Gummy bears. Oh geez, Claire. Chris grinned as he tore open the king-size bag, digging into grab the strawberry bears crammed in near the top. After putting them in his mouth, Chris offered a bag to Barry, and then to Joseph and Jill across from him. They both nodded, and Chris walked around from his table, not caring about Wesker's hard gaze on the back of the head. He poured a handful of bears into each of their palms and moved on to Brad, who looked from the bag to Wesker, fearful that he might say something. When his captain said nothing, Brad pulled a handful of sticky bears and nodded in thanks. Chris moved to Wesker. Want some bears? Wesker raised an eyebrow at the candy in question, peering inside the plastic bag as Chris held it down for him. Bears? Yeah, gummy bears. Do you want them or not? Chris pulled out Wesker pulled out a green gummy bear out and squished it between his fingers. What is the purpose of these bears ever to cause cavities and health problems? That's only if you eat too much, Captain, Jill piped in, popping the last few bears in her mouth. Really? It's not like it's crack, Joseph added. Wesker rolled his eyes. Clearly, he said, with a bit of piece off of the green bear, rolling it on its tongue, tasting, analyzing. He swallowed and reached for the bag of the small handful that tasted like lemon one next. Good, huh? Quite, but something tells me these bears serve as more than just a treat. Either you're trying to get on my good side, or your guilty coincidence is just weighing too heavily on that puny brain of yours. Which is it? Chris sighed and retreated to his desk. Don't go there, Wesker. If you didn't notice, I offered everyone, not just you. So technically, with both your theories are wrong. I beg you to differ. You would, Chris countered, but that's fine. I wouldn't expect that. Clairvoyant, are we? Wesker mocked, finishing off the last of his bears. Just observant. The two just stared at each other down. Silence with the exception of the ticking wall clock from the wall. Jill and Joseph exchanged looks. Barry rolled his shoulders, not quite feeling the tension from the present was before. Brad remained still, looking back and forth between his captain and Chris. Do you have any more? Wesker asked, breaking the tension just a tad more. Chris popped a few more bears in his mouth. More what? More of those. Wesker nodded to the bag. Oh, these bears? Chris smiled in ignorance. I do, but I'm not sure how much. Hold on, let me count them one by... Never mind. Easy, Wesker. Don't get your jock in a twist. I was only kidding there. Chris sealed the bag and tossed it to Wesker, who caught it with one hand and opened it with the other. Everyone watched as spectator before him as Wesker picked off the bears one by one, not bothering to relish the taste that had done previously. After he nearly consumed all of the half the bag, Wesker looked up at his team, not embarrassed in the slightest, and scowled. I'm sorry, do you need something? Nobody fucking laugh, Chris thought. He cleared his throat. I see you like them. They have a particular taste that I find appealing, yes? Good to know. Wesker didn't practically like the mischievous sounding tone, but he pushed it aside for now, too satisfied with his new vice. He wasn't so much of a candy eater, but there was something about these bears that made his taste buds come alive. Sure, it beat the hell out of those bitter coffee when he was used to drinking anyway. Wesker tipped the bag back and polished off the stragglers before crumbling the bag in his hands. Where did you get these? Chris shrugged. I don't know. Claire put them in my lunch together this morning. She probably got them at the grocery store yesterday. I'll ask her if she'd like. No, if it's no trouble. Of course it's not. There was a slight pause before Chris added, Well, there is something. Ah, there is, Wesker said with a smirk. I was wondering when you'd come up with a compromise. You wouldn't be Chris Redfield if you didn't. And that's why you're Captain. How about I get you a bag of bears every day for a whole week? Here it comes, Wesker mumbled as he crossed his legs. If you drop the whole conversation situation we're in, huh? Sounds like a fair deal, right? Sounds like a bribery, Chris. I suppose you are eager to be discharged. You'd be in the same boat for accepting the bribe. Besides, I'm not the one who ate all the bears, Wesker. It really would have been rude of me not to, after your generous offer. Wouldn't you agree? Not really, so that is a yes? Wesker pierced his lips and thought, keeping his eyes locked on Chris. A bag of bears you're all set to free? 5 bags. Very well, 5 bears in exchange for the innocent. Wesker exchanged his hand. You have a deal, Chris. Numerous sighs of relief echoed throughout the background as Chris's hand met Wesker's. Pleasure in doing business, Wesker. Wesker smirked as he dropped his hand to the side. The pleasure's all mine. He then checked his watch once more. I suppose I've kept you all here longer than I needed. In fact, since I'm in such a good mood, why don't you head home for the day? I need to stay behind to finish some work in peace. He waved them away. Before I change my mind. It didn't take quite long for everyone to pack up and file out. Joseph brought to the rear, before they could leave. Wesker called him back. A quick word, Frost. Joseph waved his arm to his team and walked over to Wesker, hoping that he wouldn't take long. But the eager feeling to go home suddenly vanished, only to be replaced by dread at the sight of Wesker's venomous smile. You're not going anywhere, Frost. What are you talking about, Captain? You made a deal with Chris. We all saw. You must have not been paying attention then. For you see, I clearly said in exchange of the innocent. You, my boy, are far from the innocent. A dark chuckle erupted from Wesker. I told you that you reeked of the guilt.